Beacon Press Audio presents Nice Racism: How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm by Robin DiAngelo. This audiobook is narrated by me, Robin DiAngelo. Published by Beacon Press Audio, 2021. Introduction. When Carolyn walked into the orientation session, she inwardly rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. Here we go again, she thought, as she looked out at a veritable sea of well-meaning whiteness. She was attending the orientation to learn more about an organization that described itself as committed to social justice. While the organization was overwhelmingly white, they were working hard to educate themselves on various forms of oppression. This wasn't the first time she was the only black person in the room, but Carolyn reasoned that at least these white people were committed social progressives. She joined and started attending a weekly subgroup where she was, yet again, the only person of color in the room. At the end of the 6th week, the facilitator, a white male, informed her that the next week they would be studying racism and asked her if she would teach that session. She told him she needed to think about it, and then she called me in a state of distress. Carolyn and I have been friends and colleagues for over 20 years. We met when we were both hired as facilitators of a mandated equity training for a government organization. Since that time, we have co-led countless anti-racism sessions and been through many of our own personal challenges navigating a long-term interracial friendship. Her mentorship has had a profound impact on my understanding of systemic racism. When Carolyn called me that day, she was torn. On the one hand, she wanted to give them this information because they desperately needed it. On the other hand, to be the only black person in the group and have to explain how racism manifested, both in general and in the group itself, was terrifying. She risked being subjected to the patterns of white fragility that are all too common when white people are challenged on race. Minimization, defensiveness, anger, invalidation, hurt feelings, guilt. Would she be seen as an aggressor as they positioned themselves as victimized? Would she lose valued relationships? Would this be her last session in the group? She decided that she would share her experience as a black person if I came with her and also spoke to them, specifically as a white person, about white patterns of racism. She well understood that white people are generally more receptive to hearing about racism from other white people. My presence would also ensure that she had a trusted ally at her side to support her. I agreed. As the days passed and she prepared her presentation, she called me many times to vent her fear and anxiety. The request to teach an all-white group about racism took a tremendous toll on Carolyn. In addition to the emotional work she was doing, she spent hours preparing her presentation, trying to make it indisputable so she would not be negated. Being in front of an all-white group also triggered in her a lifetime of racist abuse from white teachers, schools, and society at large. She was up against the relentless messages that as a black woman, she was unintelligent and had no knowledge of intrinsic value. Finally, the evening came. The group listened thoughtfully to both of us and then asked questions or made comments. Toward the end of the evening, a member of the group stated, in a tone somewhat critical of the organization, "I am so glad this organization is finally teaching us about racism. I have been waiting for them to do that." This statement was a fish-out-of-water moment for me, in which I could see a cross-racial dynamic I hadn't seen before. I had witnessed the tremendous amount of emotional and intellectual work Carolyn had to do in order to make this presentation. Now, watching this group sitting comfortably on their chairs and effortlessly receiving the result of Carolyn's labor, I saw a metaphor for colonialism. The group was in essence saying, "We'll observe you and seek to understand you. In doing so, we'll relax while you work. You'll provide us with the fruits of your labor. We'll receive these fruits and consider them. We'll decide what to keep and what to reject, what we deem worthy of consideration and what we don't. We thank the organization for bringing you to us because we've desired your knowledge. But if you weren't brought before us, we wouldn't, as we have not up until now, expend any effort in seeking it for ourselves. Critical race scholar Shireen Razik, writing about whiteness and the pattern of studying those who are seen as different, describes this mentality as the cornerstone of imperialism. The colonized possess a series of knowable characteristics that can be studied, known, and managed accordingly by the colonizers whose own complicity remains masked. Further, this group member positioned not having this knowledge previously as a shortcoming of the organization rather than of himself, so that he also managed to elevate his own moral standing. Still, his credit went to the organization, not to Carolyn. While I assume that none of this was his conscious intention, it was the impact of his comment. And what role did I play in all of this? While I could clearly see the racial dynamics in the group's behavior, I didn't ask myself at the time what aspects of these dynamics I was in collusion with. Looking back, I realized that while it was exhausting for Carolyn, I found it to be an interesting learning experience, one in which I was the good white person, there as an ally for my black friend. I came away from that incident feeling proud of myself and how I had supported Carolyn, and equipped with new insights on how other white people's racism worked. I understand that Carolyn asked me to support her in that particular way, and to decline was not an option I would have considered. But that does not put me outside the racism she was preparing for. And as I write this, I realize that I never checked myself and my own racial arrogance in that situation. What might it have looked like if I had? I could have challenged the judgment I felt as I watched the group interact with Carolyn. I could have shared my insight on the colonialist dynamic I observed in the group, the very people who were there to further their understanding of racism. I could have checked in with Carolyn and actually asked if she felt supported by me. But I did not do any of those things. Instead, on our ride home, I assumed for myself that she felt supported, and instead of asking, I proceeded to point out everything I noticed about what the white people in the group were doing. This had the effect of both reinforcing the racism for Carolyn, in case she had missed any nuance of it that I noticed, while positioning me as the smartest white person in the room, the white person who got it. I didn't give her much room to express any pain or disappointment she may have felt about aspects of my own complicity. Our identities are not separate from the white supremacist society in which we are raised, and our patterns of cross-racial engagement are not merely a function of our unique personalities. Good intentions, so-called open-mindedness, belief in racial justice, and identifying as racially progressive are not sufficient. Wherever we may be on the continuum of seeing and addressing racism, we are not at the end. As a white progressive who has spent years engaged in anti-racist work, I have developed self-awareness, skills, and relationships I would never have had if I had simply followed the path laid out before me by mainstream society. At the same time, I continue to struggle with stubborn and deeply internalized racist patterns. My work is meant to share my learning as well as my failures with other white people so that we might do less racial harm. To that end, when I say we, our, and us, I am referring to white people. I understand that race is a social construct whose borders and boundaries shift over time. The category white is not perfectly discrete. However, for the purposes of this analysis, I use the term white to refer to people who are defined and perceived to be white by their societies at large and in most contexts. In Chapter 1, I will explain which white people I mean specifically by the qualifier progressive. As a white person who writes about race specifically to my fellow white people, I am not seeking to teach white people about black people. I am seeking to teach white people about ourselves in relation to black and other people of color. Black people, indigenous peoples, and people of color may find an insider analysis useful in navigating.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?